Waiting. Wait. There it is.
Oh, yep, we're live. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 33 of the TechForge podcast.
Why does that number keep going up?
Three.
Yeah,
That
it's
number
almost
just
like
keeps going up.
yeah, it's almost like there's a new episode. It increments the number or something. Probably should check that loop.
Yeah, that's a bunch of silly garbage stuff.
Maybe one day we'll have three. Three threes.
Ooh.
It's the mark of the half beast. It's the mark of the half beast. The mark of the half beast. El Chupacabra.
Well, tonight when we're recording this, whenever you happen to be watching, general viewer, we have quite a few interesting topics this week. Of course, the GTX 1660 Ti came out literally the day after we recorded our last video. So we're going to discuss that tonight, even though that puts us about a week behind everybody else.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Also, apparently the USB naming, the body that names the USB naming standards apparently has gone completely off the rails.
Well, I think they're drunk.
You know, at this point, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
And also, AMD and the infamous Vega's price cut that wasn't.
Yep.
But we'll get there. We're going to open up with the USB IF's complete blunder in the way that they market the latest generation of USB 3.2, as they're calling it. But wait, there's more. So we already know that the branding for USB 3.0 and then 3.1 was a total mess. You had Super Speed 3.0, and then you had USB 3.1 Gen 1 and Gen 2.
Mm-hmm.
Gen 1 was 5 gigabits per second, and Gen 2 was 10 gigabits per second. Now, based on this already dumb naming scheme, what would you think USB 3.2 at 20 gigabits per second would be called?
3.2.
And maybe at most stick a moniker like Gen 3 on the end, right?
Yeah, that would make
Oh,
sense.
No. That would make sense. Exactly. Apparently, the USB IF, which is the industry group that develops the USB standard, has decided that the successor to USB 3.1 is going to be USB 3.2, but it's going to come in 3 different variants.
Oh my gosh.
You're going to have USB 3.2 Gen 1, which is basically the same as USB 3.0 at 5 gigabits per second.
Yep.
You're going to have USB 3.2 Gen 2, which is basically going to be the same as the 10 gigabits per second of USB 3.1 Gen 2. And the new speed for 20 gigabits per second devices is going to be USB 3.2 Gen 2 by 2.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's beyond ridiculous because you're going to be spending more time researching compatible motherboards and cases than you will other types of features which are very useful, like the internal layout of your case. You know, say, for example, okay, I want to build a higher-end system, so I'm going to go water cooling. So I need to make sure that, like, my case is compatible with X types of radiators, or I need to make sure that my video card or the video card I would like to get is going to fit in the case along with all the other hardware. Like, I need to make sure that I research these motherboard chipsets. Blah blah blah. Like, very useful, good research, right? Into computer build. No, no, no. You have to take as much time as you would researching that stuff as you would in, okay, so I want a case that's USB 3.2 compatible. Well, are you going to get the one that's compatible with the 5 gigabit per second spec, the 10 or the 20?
And how do you know?
Exactly. And I need to make sure my motherboard supports it.
Yep.
So apparently the decision to go with the USB 3.2 Gen 2x2 designation is apparently due to the fact that it's running two 10 gigabits per second connections along different pairs of wires simultaneously. Hence the name 2x2.
Mm-hmm.
Never mind the fact that that doesn't follow numerically at all. And that for the average consumer, they're going to sit there and go, what?
Yeah. So what is that? What does that mean? So 1 is compatible with 5, 2 is compatible with 10, and then 2x2 is compatible with 20?
Thankfully, for the consumer branding, they had slightly more sanity. And they're just going to call it super speed USB 20 gigabit per second.
All right. That makes sense.
In all seriousness, why not just call it that from the start?
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand you need a technical designation for a given standard. But this whole naming scheme for USB 3.x, which is what I'm going to call it, because if you call it USB 3.0, apparently you're referencing a very specific standard. But for USB 3.x, the whole naming scheme has been absolutely abominable from the beginning.
It's ridiculous. It's extremely confusing. Like USB 1, no problem. USB 2, no problem. When USB 3 rolled around, no problem. But now they've got all this other stuff around it. 3.1, 3.2, 3.1 Gen 1, USB Type-C. Like, it's all...
Admittedly, back in the USB 1 days, there was USB 1.1, which was a slightly faster version of USB 1. But, I mean, the difference there was a doubling in speed from 12 megabits per second to 24 megabits per second.
Okay, but then they only had 2, right? Like,
yeah.
Okay, and then that stuck around for a while because it took a bit of time to get to USB 2.
And USB 2 was a huge jump because it was up to 480 megabits per second.
Oh, yeah. And USB 3 was a big jump.
Basically, USB-IF, you might want to consult your marketing department and either fire and replace them or, just get a new one.
Yeah, it's usually not a good thing to hire drunk people. Like, there's no such thing as functioning alcoholic. Yeah.
Either that or it's a really bad idea to have engineers come up with your marketing language. And I speak that as an engineer myself.
So you take the request from the customer.
Mm-hmm.
No, my secretary does that. So your secretary takes the request from the customer. What do you do? Anyway, go ahead.
Well, in slightly more friendly news for us, apparently Microsoft and Facebook have come together to upgrade an undersea cable across the Atlantic from Virginia to Bilbao, Spain, that breaks the data transferred speed record for a transatlantic data transmission.
What? Fache Book does something meaningful, helpful, and cool? What?
So apparently this new cable increases speed between the two endpoints by up to 20%.
Pretty cool.
With no modifications to the cable.
Really?
Huh.
So this is the Maria, M-A-R-E-A, transatlantic subsea cable.
Is that like diarrhea?
No. Although, I guess they both are technically liquid.
Oh.
Or, well, Maria is under a bunch of liquid, but...
You just blew my mind, Ned.
So apparently, in this joint effort between Facebook and Microsoft, they were able to record a transfer speed of 26.2 terabits per second.
Wow.
26.2 billion bits per second. Even if you divide that by 8, that's 3 terabytes plus per second.
That's insane.
And remember, this is over a distance of some 4,000 miles.
That's impressive. So the diarrhea cable was conceived in order to help meet ever-increasing demand for high-speed Maria cable. Pretty cool.
Yeah. Apparently, the average transfer is only 9.5 terabits per second. So this was almost 3 times as fast as the average transfer across this cable, but it was 20% faster than the previous maximum fastest speed across this cable.
I still can't imagine 9.5 terabits per second. And then to imagine 26.
Yeah.
Well, just imagine transferring an entire 1 terabyte hard drive every second, and that's roughly the transfer speed this thing averages.
I need that. Man, I could have backed up my 3 terabytes of games.
Yeah, in a second.
In 3 seconds.
Or 3 seconds.
Well, it was a little less than 3 terabytes because of file allocation.
Dude, you'd be waiting on your drive speed.
I think it was like 2.7 or 2.6 terabytes.
Your ability to record would be your bottleneck.
Yeah. And that was when I didn't have USB 3 in my computer. I was still on USB 2.
There you go.
Not even that fancy 3.2, whatever confusing language. 2 by 2. 2 by 2. We are stepping in front of us. 2 by 2.
We are. It's 4, by the way.
Ah.
Yeah. So, we were talking about finding good water cooling parts a little bit earlier, or trying to figure out and research water cooling parts. Well, if you want an entire water cooling kit in a box, AlphaCool has you covered with their new Ice Bear Solo kit. This is from Tom's Hardware. The AlphaCool Ice Bear Solo, that's E-I-S-B-A-E-R in case anyone's wondering, because German, combines a CPU water cooling block, pump, and reservoir into a single product.
Yep.
Basically, all you have to do is provide your own radiator and your own tubing, and it handles the rest.
Mm-hmm.
In your own liquid.
Well, of course, but...
I'm really curious. I'm really interested in trying it. Of course, it depends on the price.
Well, I don't know how much it would be. It wouldn't be terrible. So AlphaCool's products are typically pretty competitive on price. It's basically doing what all the other AIOs do. AIOs already do this stuff.
Okay.
But the nice thing about this is that since it's combining a reservoir and a pump into a CPU block, this is great for small form factor builds.
Exactly.
And
so in
go ahead.
So in the UK, it's roughly
55 euros.
Euros. I was trying to figure out what symbol was. And in a converter, it's $62.52 US.
That's not bad.
Yeah.
Considering you'd pay easily double that for a CPU block, a res, and a pump.
Yeah.
If you bought them separately.
You'd pay more than double that because you want to figure about $90 for a CPU block alone. And then if you got a pump reservoir combo, that's usually $100 to $150 right there.
Yep.
So,
yep.
I was going to say, even for something like I'm using the SwiftTech H240X or H220X. I don't remember which. Anyway, that's an integrated pump, reservoir, and radiator all together as a single unit, combined with a SwiftTech heat killer block that they go ahead and pre-fill and use their own add their own tubing for. But it's designed as a modular kit, so that if you wanted to remove the tubing and add, additional blocks or additional radiators, you could.
Yeah.
But
I do like that.
Unfortunately, it's not made anymore because, well, they got sued because apparently they copied a particular design from a particular company who will remain nameless because I don't want to be demonetized.
Well, that company owns the patents for North America. So anybody that makes an AIO in North America has to follow their design. Unfortunately, those designs are aluminum only. Yeah. So
that's why some of the other AIOs that are out there use such weird designs, like say Deep Cool's Captain 240EX.
Yeah.
That uses that weird pipe on the pump.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then the flow indicator.
Right. So that it's sufficiently different enough that it differentiates it from that particular patent of that particular company.
Yep.
Fractal suffered the same fate with their Kelvin. They had an expandable Kelvin AIO, which was copper based, which means that since the majority of the open loop water cooling market is copper, you could expand and not really mix metals. But now they had to go with
the Celsius lineup.
The Celsius lineup, which is still good and it's expandable, but it uses an aluminum radiator instead.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, like I said, it's still good. And there's at least one YouTube video out there that shows how to expand it. But unfortunately, you're mixing metals if you're not careful. So,
which means you're probably going to need a kill coil.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, we could get into that later if you want, but I don't know.
Well, it depends on which metals you're mixing and in what quantities and what type of fluid you're using. But
yeah. But anyway, getting back to this, it looks like the value's there. I'm not sure what kind of pump design they're using. There's two kinds of pumps out there that are widely in use. One's a D5, the other's a DDC. Both have their strengths and weaknesses. Most people like the D5s better because they're typically quieter and both are very reliable. But this has a maximum pump rotation speed of 2,600 RPM, which pretty much puts it in line with other AIO designs here in North America. Like most of the time, your AIOs will max out at around the same RPM range. So, which honestly should be decent enough for any kind of, so radiators aren't going to have any kind of flow resistance, or they're going to be very minimal. And any kind of tubing bends you use will be fine. The only time you might run into problems is if you're putting a lot of blocks. So your blocks are going to be your most restrictive item in your loop.
Right.
But if you have, say, one GPU block, this, and a radiator, this would be just fine. or something like that. And you can always add a reservoir if you wanted to.
Right.
So this is pretty cool, man.
Yeah, according to the press here, apparently uses what they call a DC-LT low noise ceramic pump, which I believe is a variant of the DDC. But
okay.
But apparently it is it has 0.85 meters of delivery head with a 70 liter per hour maximum flow rate, which is not bad.
Pretty cool.
So if you're looking for an effective solution to get yourself started in water cooling, the AlphaCool Ice Bear might be what you're looking for if you're willing to import it from Europe.
Yep.
I like the fact that oh, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
So I mean, just in the pictures here from the article, it looks like they've got one that's chrome, one that's black. It's just an interesting design. I'd be curious to see some testing done on a CPU to see how well it does.
Yeah. And then it also depends on if this is compatible with Intel and Ryzen or just one.
I imagine they'd make it compatible with both. Most of the CPU blocks that you get anymore are going to be compatible with both.
Oh, yeah, it does say that.
Looking at the block itself looks universal, and they do say it does come with an Intel and an AMD mount.
Yeah, I just saw that.
And so I've got the AlphaCool Ice Block, which is and it's compatible with a number of Intel sockets as well as AMD. I want to say it might even be compatible with TR4, but I'd have to look. And it's super easy to install, man. It's by far a lot easier to install that thing than it was a lot of the air coolers I've installed in the last couple of years. So, yeah.
All right. Well, moving forward, this next one from Notebook Check is one I just wanted to note really quickly. It's kind of a follow-up to one we did a couple of weeks ago regarding the Asus TUF FX505 series laptop. Apparently, that laptop, which is the first to feature the Ryzen 3000 series APUs, in particular the Ryzen 5 3550H, apparently is now shipping.
Cool.
Remember, this is a laptop aimed at roughly an $800 price point. It's not designed to compete directly with let me rephrase that. It is designed to compete directly with Intel's 45-watt Core i5 8300H CPU. So it's basically a Ryzen 5 3500U, but with a higher maximum TDP. So instead of being a 15-watt part, it's closer to a 35 or 45-watt part. And this particular model will be coming with an RX 560X GPU, which puts it solidly as an entry-level gaming notebook.
Well, they're stating it's a 35-watt Ryzen 5 3550H, and they're stating that it competes directly with a 45-watt Intel Core i5 8300H. So,
which I've seen some of the, not the 8300H in particular, but I've seen the i5 8250Us. Those were the 4-core 8-thread CPUs. And the 8300H is basically a higher clocked version of that.
Okay.
And the CPU, or the laptops that I've seen with the i5 8250U typically come equipped with the GeForce MX 150, or its successor now, the MX 250. And I think a similar AMD CPU equipped with the RX 560X, which, remember, the MX 150 is roughly equivalent to the GT 1030 in power.
Yeah. Yep.
So the RX 560X would be a significant step above that.
Well, this Ryzen 5 3550H, I mean, it's a decent CPU for a notebook. I mean, it's a 4-core 8-thread CPU with 2 megs of level 2 cache, 4 megs of level 3, and it's got a base clock of 2.1 and a boost of 3.7. It's probably going to, well, I don't know that much about laptop CPUs anymore, but it does have 8 Vega cores, so plus the 560H, I mean, or 560X or whatever that thing is. At least it does have some discrete GPU, although it's not really going to be much of a gamer. But I mean, at $800, it's not horrible.
I mean, the RX 560X, it's going to be roughly, it can probably handle 1080p low or 720p at higher graphics settings.
I imagine it would be roughly similar to a 2400G.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, maybe slightly better.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to see this particular article was from notebookcheck.net. And so they are currently in progress of doing a review of that particular laptop and CPU. So it'll be the first one of that type. And so I am eagerly awaiting that because, well, I like my laptop, but it's almost 5 years old at this point. It is in need of an upgrade.
That is
it's the current laptop I'm currently using is a Core i7-4702MQ. It's a Haswell part, quad-core, 8-thread, with a GT750M. So, and considering I paid about $775 for that back in 2014, this would be an almost direct competitor price-wise and a solid upgrade.
Well, you know, I mean, at around that price point to get an 8-thread notebook, that's not bad. You can do quite a bit of workstation stuff on that.
Of course, Intel is not to be denied in the mobile space either. They have been hard at work on their Lakefield SoC. Now, this is apparently going to be their first implementation of their Foveros 3D packaging technology. And Intel, just in the past couple of days, has revealed some interesting information about Foveros, and in particular, using Lakefield to demonstrate it. So Lakefield is going to be their system-on-chip CPU that's going to have 10 nanometers CPU cores combined with Intel's Gen 11 graphics, but it's going to be built on a substrate that is going to be a different process node. And some of the parts on this CPU, or on this SoC, I should say, are going to be from different process nodes. Even though the whole SoC itself is only going to have a die area of 144 millimeters squared. That's only 12 millimeters by 12 millimeters.
That's a pretty, I don't know what that is in CPU land. Like, that'd be a very small GPU.
Yeah, considering that the RTX 2080 Ti has a 754 millimeters squared.
Well, that thing's ridiculous, man. That thing's ridiculous. So the Vega is like, Vega at 14 nanometers around 500, I want to say. And that's a big one. So 700, that's just ridiculous.
And so, Lakefield apparently is going to use a base die and cache on 22 nanometer process, what they call their IOP 1222 process, combined with a compute chiplet design with CPU and GPU at 10 nanometer, and then 2 layers of DRAM on top of all of that. And that's how they're going to be doing the stacking using Foveros.
Makes you wonder how the heat transfer is. and how high they can clock these individual chiplets. Be interesting to see a review on this.
Well, this is still early days yet, and this is basically Intel showing off how the architecture, and in particular how Foveros works.
Mm.
And so, I tell you what, I'll share my screen so you all can see some, so you and our viewers can see some of these screens.
Hey, Ned.
Yes?
So when you said Node and Foveros, I don't know why, but I immediately thought of having to go take a poop.
You and your obsession, your scatological obsession.
Yeah.
So this is what I was talking about before. Notice you have a base die and cache built on P1222. That's their 22 nanometer process. That's a well-aged process that they've been using for a long time.
It's like wine.
Yeah. Remember, their last 22 nanometer CPU, that was Haswell.
Mm-hmm.
Their first 14 nanometer was technically Broadwell, but in reality, it was Skylake. And then 10 nanometer CPU and GPU, that's going to be using their Sunny Cove CPU cores.
Ooh, Sunny.
And then the 2 DRAM layers. And they talk about how it is a hybrid CPU design using one large 10 nanometer Sunny Cove core, and then 4 smaller cores in almost a little dot big design, kind of like what ARM does.
Yeah, like my smartphone.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Big little, big little, big little. I'm confused now.
But this one's interesting in that, unlike most of your smartphone CPUs or SoCs that have a big dot little architecture, where you have, for every big CPU core, you have a smaller CPU core that handles background tasks. This one instead has a single big CPU core and then 4 small CPU cores. So
Is that picture showing RAM directly on the CPU?
You see that correctly.
That's DDR4.
It is LPDDR4.
Wow. That is pretty awesome. That'd be weird to see this in a desktop format, to where you don't have to buy sticks of RAM. You just have a CPU that has a RAM in it. I don't know if it'd be enough, though.
I think you'd still need to get RAM, though.
Given the size of this particular SoC, I can almost guarantee this is going into mobile products.
Yeah, I can see that more in mobile.
So
you're not going to have little CPU cores in a desktop, most likely. You're going to have You're going to have the same. You're going to have a number of cores that are, I guess, would be considered big, but they would be identical.
Oh yeah.
And so here's where it's showing that each side is 12 millimeters. So that's where we get the 144 millimeter die area. And they claim longer battery life, world-class performance, blazing fast connectivity. And they show what one of the potential boards, logic boards, that would have one of these CPUs would look like. They're saying it's roughly 125 millimeters by 30 millimeters. Again, that's perfectly sized for a smartphone, a tablet, or maybe a light convertible device like a Microsoft Surface style device. And notice they compare it to a pen.
Okay.
In size. So basically, it's looking like their solution for mobile. You know, they tried with the Intel Atom chips, and then with the Z series chips that just never really took off because they either consumed way too much power or they weren't performant enough at their particular power level.
Well, it's kind of unfortunate because one of their more successful consumers was a line or two of the Zenfone 2, which actually at the time was pretty competitive in terms of performance and power consumption and heat, but it just unfortunately never took off. I had a Zenfone 2, and I actually loved that thing.
Yeah, the Zenphones were solid phone, still are solid phones. It's just they're not carried by very many carriers in the United States.
Yeah.
And whether they'll work with your given carrier in the US is up in the air, particularly if you're with Verizon or Sprint, because they use CDMA instead of GSM.
Right.
So, yeah. I was actually looking, when I got my current phone, which is a Moto G5 Plus, I was looking at getting the Asus Zenfone Laser, which was the sequel to the Zenfone 2.
Oh, okay.
Unfortunately, it only worked on AT&T and T-Mobile, and I use Verizon.
Gotcha.
So that's why I went with the Moto G5 Plus, and why it will soon be upgraded to the Moto G7.
Nice. Well, you can't go wrong with Motorola. That usually they're priced really, really well.
Indeed. All right, so that's all the smaller stories that I had found this week.
Sure.
So let's move to our first big topic of the evening, and that is the GTX 1660 Ti. Obviously, this came out last Friday, right when we upload TechForge at 8 a.m. Central Time on Fridays, and that was also when the NDA broke, or the embargo broke, on the 1660 Ti. So it was kind of funny to watch TechForge be right in the middle of all these GTX 1660 Ti review videos.
Yep.
And so that's why we are we're coming at this almost a week after the actual launch, because we recorded literally the night before it launched. So the review I chose as representative, it is no secret at this point that I'm a fan of the writing over at AnonTech. I appreciate the level of detail they go into and the breakdowns they do of a particular card. And so in this case, they received a copy of the EVGA GTX 1660 Ti XC gaming model. And this card, well, here, just let me show you. This card is thick.
Is it? I haven't seen it yet. Let me take a look.
Okay, let me present to everyone.
Okay, right. I've seen this. Yeah.
So notice this is a short, almost mini ITX length card, but it is triple slot.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why I say it is thick with a double C.
It's got a huge cooler on it. It's got a tall heatsink cooler on it because RTX hot.
Well, and I think I've read up on this card a bit. Go ahead.
That looks, I mean, I know that's the GTX 1660 Ti now that I actually looked at it, but that still looks like the RTX 2060 Shroud, though.
Is it?
It wouldn't surprise me.
I mean, that is the same design on the top of it's either the same or similar design on the top for the 2060.
Well, I have a sneaking suspicion that EVGA might have reused their RTX 2060 cooler on the 1660 Ti.
Well, I mean, if you can save a buck, why not? I mean, a cooler's a cooler if it'll fit more than one product SKU.
Yep. All right, we'll come back to our lovely faces. So basically, we've talked about several times in the last few weeks about the specs of the 1660 Ti, and the leaks were pretty much dead on. It has 1,536 CUDA cores with 48 ROPs, a core clock of 1,500 megahertz, a boost clock of 1,770 megahertz, 12 gigabits per second GDDR6 memory on a 192-bit bus. It has obviously no RTX cores, so no Tensor cores, no RT cores. But one of the things that, and I've also included a link to this video in the description below in our link to all of our articles, was when Adored TV took a look at the TU116 GPU die, it, instead of the RT and Tensor cores, the SMs on the TU116 have dedicated FP16 units.
Well, that's because, and I think Adored probably breaks it down pretty good, but that's because the cores that it's lacking handle that for the RTX lines. And there are several games out there that do utilize FP16 floating point math execution. And so they had to basically substitute or replace that. So you can kind of give an argument for this being, yes, it's Turing based, but you could almost say it's a slightly different architecture.
Yeah, it's almost probably the best way to put it would be Turing light.
Yeah.
And by the way, the whole reason for using FP16, AMD calls it rapid packed math, but it's basically 16-bit floating point math that's useful in certain engines to boost performance. In particular, with newer engines based around DirectX 12 or Vulkan. So yeah, AMD was marketing it as rapid packed math, but it's basically just 16-bit floating point math.
Yep.
Also, the leaks got the price just right. It is launching with an MSRP of $279 USD.
And you can actually buy it at that price.
Exactly. Now, the XC gaming model that AnonTech reviewed goes for significantly more than that. I think it's close to 300 or 320. But regardless, they tested it at the stock settings as well as the overclock settings. And the 1660 Ti, NVIDIA compared it to the GTX 960 and said that it delivered up to 3 times the performance of a GTX 960.
I guess they do that because the average gamer waits 2 card generations before they consider an upgrade. So
right, the average gamer usually upgrades on a 3 to 4 year cycle.
Yeah, I guess I could kind of see why they would do that.
Still, the GTX 960 is certainly not the card to compare this against. In the previous generation, the card to compare it against is the GTX 1070 and its AMD equivalent, the Vega 56, which actually got AMD in some hot water, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Yeah, Jason has some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I've got some very strong thoughts on that. Anyway, go ahead.
And so, if we head to, we'll skip ahead to AnonTech's conclusion. Basically, if you're coming from the GTX 1060, the 6 gig, at 1440p, it's the 1660 Ti is 37% faster. At 1080p, it is 36% faster. And right now, it's selling for a similar price as a retail GTX 1066 gig. Basically, this makes the GTX 1060 6 gigabyte obsolete.
So this is actually the first Turing-based card I could recommend. It's great for high refresh rate 1080p gaming, right? And it's at a decent price point. You can actually buy these cards at the MSRP. And if you want to spend a little bit more, like 290 instead of the 280, that opens you up and to where you've got a lot of different types of coolers to really shop around for. Now, if you're spending more than 300, I'd kind of question that, but
especially with the RTX 2060 right there at 349.
Yeah, but honestly, this is kind of classic NVIDIA. Back in the day, before they started selling Founders Edition cards, when they would let their card partners kind of create their own designs. It's power efficient. It doesn't generate a whole lot of heat, and the price point's pretty decent. I mean, it's basically a GTX 1070 with two gigabytes less frame buffer. So I've got kind of an issue with the 6 gigabyte only, but honestly, it is still enough for current 1080p gaming, especially since their memory compression is better than in AMD's, so they can kind of get away with it. I mean, it's a decent value for right now. So I was kind of surprised. It's a pleasant surprise. And it puts a hurt on the 590.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't think the 580 is too affected because the 580 is like that 1080p specialist, which as long as you're shopping around the $180 price point or 190, like that still offers really good value at that price point. But,
and the RX 580 routinely goes on sale for between $130 and $150.
Exactly. And at that price point, that's a steal, especially with the game bundles and stuff. Like, that's still a very good card. It's just there's no reason to buy 590 right now.
Yeah.
No, there's not.
The 1660 Ti is probably the first real sub $300 card to make 1080p Ultra viable in practically every game, and to make 1440p entry level, like 1440p medium, also possible for under $300.
Go ahead.
Unless you're counting, of course, some of the fire sale 1070s back in November-ish. But
you can still get 1070 for right around $300, but the only reason to really consider that would be if you want the extra two gigabytes of video memory. Other than that, I mean, like you said, 1080p Ultra. This would do 1080p Ultra 100 frames per second or better. So, and I would have trouble justifying Vega 56 right now because it's hard to find those around $400.
Yeah, and given that, well, we'll talk more about that in a little bit, but given that it's right around that $400 price point, barring fire sale prices,
yeah. The only reason I could consider, I mean, the only way I would consider getting a Vega 56 over this would be if I want to tinker with it. If I know I'm going to water cool it, if I'm going to be flashing a Vega 64 or liquid cool BIOS on, like if I'm going to tinker with it, then yeah, you can unlock some pretty insane performance out of that sucker. But you have to be willing to put in the work and willing to tinker with it. The 1660 Ti just works great right out of the box. Like you slap it in, boom, you're done.
And that was one of the things that Anantech did note in their review. The EVGA model they reviewed, the XC Gaming, is actually EVGA's baseline model. So sorry about that. I was confusing it with their higher end model that I'm trying to remember what that one's called. I think it's like the XC Black or something like that.
Well, the XC Black Gaming can be found on Newegg for $279.
Okay, so that's the base card. But interestingly, EVGA ships it with a slightly higher TDP of 130 watts versus the 120 watts stock. But they tested that, and the performance difference was less than 1%. It was margin of error.
Yeah.
Which means this is not a meaningfully TDP limited card. This is a card mostly limited by memory bandwidth and its relatively small number of CUDA cores.
Well, you slap it in if you've got a decent air cooling in your case and good power delivery. I mean, it's going to boost around 1.8 to 1.9, maybe even 2 in average workloads. So, yeah, it's a solid card. I mean, it's not high end, but, you know, I mean, you really can't knock it. It's a good price point compared to what we're used to with the 1066 gig. So, and it pretty much knocks the socks out of that sucker. So, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of this card by any means, but I could easily recommend it because it's $280 and you can buy them at $280 and you got lots of options. So, yeah, I mean, it's just a solid card.
And Hunter, I know you got a chance to watch a video that Jay's 2 Cents did that will also include. Apparently, he got some good results overclocking the 1660 Ti.
Yeah, I saw in some games it was better than, of course, not better than the 2060, but in some games it was better than the 1070 stock, and one or two it was not as good for the overclocked one, but it was pretty close. That was impressive to me because I currently have a 1070 that I use for gaming, or actually, well, yeah, I have a 1070 in my current computer. If I didn't have a 1070 already, it would be more of a interest for me to bump up. But right now I can't really justify because I can overclock the 1070, and it'd probably be it would be maybe slightly below or on par with the 2070. The 2060. The 2060 is a little faster than the 1070 Ti. But so it's not cost for me to get it, but anybody who's running a 1050 Ti or 1060, I can see them, if they can buy it at a good price or even find a cheap enough card, then yeah, if I was in that case, I would do that and then just overclock it. Especially if I can find a water block and put it on water.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid assessment.
That'd be kind of hard. Well, you could probably get a universal block. I don't know if you'd find a full cover water block would probably go between $100 and $150. So I mean, at that point, you're almost like at half the price of the card. You could find a universal block. You could find a universal block for $50 probably.
I'd be curious to see how accommodating, even though I haven't messed with the Kraken G12 yet. I'd be very interested to see how far it can be accommodating to the cards it doesn't recommend that it is compatible for, because it's not recommended to be compatible with the 590 or the 580. It's tops out on the recommended at 480. But some people have put it on the 580 and been successful. And some people have put it on non-reference cards and been successful. And they don't recommend non-reference cards.
Honestly, as long as you're patient and you've got a keen eye at the hardware store, $5 to $10, you could mount that no problem.
Yeah.
And as long as you've got some okay VRM cooling, you'd be fine.
Oh, yeah.
So, if the 1660 Ti is still just a little bit too rich for your blood, though, Thankfully, NVIDIA does have some lower priced options on the way in the GTX 1660 and GTX 1650. This comes from DigiTimes. According to their industry sources, NVIDIA is slated to launch the GTX 1660 on March the 15th and the GTX 1650 on April 30th, with minimum price tags of $229 US and $179 US. Which, if those are the case, those are definitely the 1660 at $229 is an interesting price point, but the 1650 at $179 seems a little high to me.
Yeah.
But, we haven't seen performance numbers yet, so we don't know.
Right. It's going to be interesting to see what those cards are capable of.
And to be honest, NVIDIA is not in a good place financially. I mean, yes, they've been making money, but remember, their shares are down almost 54% quarter over quarter.
Well, that's their own fault. That's their own fault.
The fact that they are trying to roll out these lower-end GTX cards, in my opinion, is their bid to try and get back the consumers who are not willing to pay the money for RTX. Particularly given how slagged the RTX technologies have been in the tech press.
Well, and that all comes back to the price point. The price points are utterly ridiculous.
I would agree.
I mean, you can say all you want about the features, about DLSS and ray tracing, but the reason they're not selling is the price point. The reason they're getting bad press is the price point.
Yep.
If 2080 Ti was $700, if 2080 was $500, if 2070 was $380 to $400, like, people would be like, okay, no problem. Those are the price points we're used to.
Yeah, that's the price point of the 10 series.
Yeah. And largely the 900 series.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, back in the day, I paid like $400 for my GTX 770. Or 350, I don't know, somewhere between 350 and 400. So, and that card lasted me a while. But it's just the price point is utterly ridiculous. So they have no one to blame but themselves for that. But there's no competition. There's no competition for RTX right now. Zero.
That is indeed the problem.
And I'll bite my tongue until we get to that part of the segment. I'm just saying. You know what? I'm glad that people are holding on to the hardware that they've got, and they're not running out to buy the RTX. I'm really glad for that. NVIDIA is not going to listen. The only way they're going to listen is this way, with money.
If their wallets hurt enough.
Yes. They have to have a reason to react or to change. And this is one of the ways that happens. It's either with competition or hurting on the bottom line or both.
Yep.
And, with NVIDIA finally starting to turn out some budget options, maybe some people will be convinced to buy some of those cards. But given all the focus they put on RTX, all the marketing focus they put on it, their big grandiose presentation of RTX that basically fell flat.
Very flat.
And I'm skeptical of the performance difference between the 1660 and the 1660 Ti to justify a $50 price difference. In my mind, it's not going to be enough of a difference.
Well, the GTX 1660, if the leaked specs are to be believed, It's going to have 1280 CUDA cores, which matches exactly the number that's on the 1060. However, the tensor architecture is faster per clock, per CUDA core. But I've been seeing leaks of the 1660 to have wildly varying different types of memory configurations. 3 gigabyte cards, 6 gigabyte cards, some with DDR5, some with DDR6. So with the 1660 Ti, it's got that 15 or 1600 CUDA core count, and it's strictly 6 gigabytes of DDR6. So there will, I mean, performance should be slightly north of the current 1066 gig.
Yeah.
And so it'll be somewhere between that and the 1070. I mean, I'm not sure where it's going to land. It's probably going to be about 10% faster than the 1066 gig.
I gotcha.
So, yeah, in my mind, that's still a bit pricey.
Yeah.
You know, 220 for 2.5 to 3 year old 1066 gigabyte performance at 290, right? So that's still a bit pricey for me, but
yeah,
I don't know. We'll have to just wait and see what the reviews say.
Pretty much. All right, so that brings us to other big topic for the night. And Jason, I know you've been holding back on this, but AMD's graphics card launches and some of the stuff that happened around the GTX 1660 launch, in particular the Vega 56 price cut that wasn't.
Exactly.
I originally had a different article here, but I decided to go with this one because it ties into the whole mess and the drama that resulted over on Twitter. This is from Forbes' Jason Evangelo.
Okay.
It was originally titled, AMD drops Radeon Vega 56 to $279 to fight NVIDIA's GTX 1660 Ti. But you'll notice there was an updated added to that title. And that is because what happened was, well, odd.
Very odd.
So apparently, Newegg had a surplus of a particular MSI Boost Air Vega 56 card. Basically, a reference style blower cooler Vega 56 from MSI that they decided to fire sale at $279.99, which just so happens to be the exact price that was the MSRP for the 1660 Ti. But it also came with a $30 manufacturer or mail-in rebate, bringing the price down to $249.99 after your $30 rebate back. And so, originally this was reported as, oh, this must be the official AMD price cut on the Vega 56 so it can fight the 1660 Ti and the RTX 2060. Only it wasn't. Apparently, this was a limited time sale on a particular model of Vega 56 that basically sold out before or right as AMD tweeted about it.
Well, not only that, but it sold out everywhere before it was even reported. And I mean, with the reviews of the 1660 Ti, a lot of people were reporting Vega 56 price drop to $279. But it was only that one part, and it was pretty much sold out everywhere. And honestly, that's a decent part. That's the exact model that I've got in my computer. And if Vega 56 did go down to $279, that's a very good deal right there. I don't care what anybody says. That's a very good deal. But the problem is Vega is pretty much end of life for all the manufacturers out there. You can still find those parts around $400, but the stock is getting limited. It's just I'm so frustrated with Radeon Technology Group right now. It's a very, very bad communication. Very bad. So if you go back to Vega launch, that was totally botched. Vega 56 and 64. The Vega 56 was supposed to MSRP at $400, but it didn't. It came out at $500. And the Vega 64 was supposed to MSRP at $500, but it came out at $600 or more. And then it seemed like overnight, like the Bitcoin thing just went out of control and you couldn't find Vega at all. And then Vega 7 comes out. You can't buy it anywhere. It's priced too high, in my opinion. And then they botched the drivers. I mean, that's one of the worst launches I've ever seen from anybody. And then you have this come out where they say, okay, Vega 56 price drop. Oh, wait, no, it's not. Come on. And they don't have anything to compete with RTX. Nothing. Navi has been delayed over a year. They've got good Polaris parts, but that architecture is over 3 years old now.
Yeah. Supposedly they are working on a technology called DirectML, but
ray tracing
for their ray tracing counterpart. But again, until we see some of that implemented,
they don't have anything to compete right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's ridiculous. I am so frustrated, and I've got a Vega part, and I've used RX 580s in very recent builds, and honestly, Radeon 7 is a good part. It's a very good part. Now that they have drivers that work, that's a 2 gigahertz part, and at that clock speed, with that memory bandwidth, it beats a 2080. It's not like romper stomper, but it's 5 to 10% faster at the same price point. You can't buy them. They are not in stock anywhere. And Vega is a good part. Vega 56 is a very good part because you can tinker with it and you can easily get its performance past the Vega 64. Vega 64 is a good part for the same reasons, because you can tinker with them. If you're willing to tinker, you can unlock a lot of performance out of these, or you can make them extremely power efficient. I'm so frustrated. I don't know what to say about it. It's beyond ridiculous.
I once heard said, and it's a thought I tend to agree with, there is no bad hardware. There are only bad price points.
I could get on that bandwagon.
And I think, honestly, what has been hurting Radeon more than anything in the space above the Polaris parts, above the RX 580s, has been price. First, due to the cryptocurrency bubble, because demand massively outexceeded supply. And so Vega everything sold out because AMD never thought it was going to be a volume part, but then suddenly it was. And then with Radeon 7, we're seeing the same thing over again. Remember, they were going to have sufficient supply to meet demand. Except it's basically been sold out ever since.
Yep. Now, I can't afford $700 on a graphics card. But
apparently there's quite a few people who can.
Well, and there's quite a few people out there that want those parts. But you can't buy them anywhere. You can buy a heavily overpriced variant on eBay or from people that have bought the Radeon 7s and they're reselling them. But I think that's about the only way you can really get one. Unless you're lucky enough to win a contest or something somewhere. But It's just NVIDIA absolutely owns the gaming market in the PC sector. And they own it because they can build a cheap high-end part and mark it up 60%. That's how much markup that NVIDIA has on its graphics cards. 60% markup.
And that's the other thing that really hurts, in particular, the Radeon 7, but also hurt Vega, was that part of the reason they were priced as high as they were was to cover the cost, because HBM2 is expensive.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
It's extremely expensive. That's what hurt them. I think they were expecting HBM to come down more in price.
Mm-hmm.
But then at some point during its life cycle, something came out where HBM was priced higher or something. I don't remember exactly what led to it. But I think they just had a number of bad things happen. They just had bad luck. You know, they had the DRAM pricing went way high, and then that also affected HBM.
Mm-hmm.
And then something happened with HBM. I don't remember what it was, but it did cause HBM to actually increase in price a bit. And I think when AMD was designing it, they expected HBM2 to come down in price, but it never did. So I just don't know why. So in the CPU area, everybody loves Ryzen, and they're selling like hotcakes, and their launches are great, you know. And they say, okay, we're going to deliver this, and then they deliver it. It comes out, boom, no problem. And when Ryzen initially came out, okay, they had some hiccups here and there, but they totally shook up the market. You know, they came out with 6 and 8 core CPUs at good prices.
Yep.
And at a time when their competition had quad cores at higher prices. And they totally shook up the market. And when they came out with Ryzen 2 or Zen Plus, it was basically the original Ryzen, but better and more stable. And they only had, you know, they came out with basically 4 products, and they're still selling like hotcakes. They perform really well. They're very power efficient. I just don't understand why, if they've got one side of the company that is performing on all cylinders and selling very well and has a hugely great and popular perception out there, and they're gaining back market share left and right, I don't see why they can't replicate that on the graphics side. It's like they're two totally different companies.
Well, remember, Radeon Technologies Group did sort of get spun off the main arm of AMD. And it could be that perhaps RTG didn't get the resources it needed. There was some speculation, in particular from some statements that Raja Kaduri made after he left AMD and went to Intel, that basically Vega was considered second class by some of AMD's leadership. And so they wanted to focus all their resources on Ryzen. And so they got some of their staff pulled off Vega. And that's why Vega turned out to be not quite as effective as they wanted it to be.
Mm-hmm. And it's too bad, because it's actually a really good part. I've been extremely impressed with this. To the point where I sold my 1070 Ti over there. So I don't know. It's interesting, but it's also kind of heartbreaking, you know?
Yeah.
Because before AMD purchased ATI, ATI was able to compete with NVIDIA. You know, they won or came out, you know, they basically traded blows, you know, some generations. I remember when the 9700 Pro came out, and that thing was a
man.
screamer. That thing was a screamer, and NVIDIA had no answer. They had no answer for it.
I had the mobile version of the 9700 Pro in a laptop that I used in college, and it was very impressive for its time.
Oh yeah, it was. And
I remember I played some of the most intensive games I owned on that thing, and it handled them like a champ. Yeah. Of course, this was like 2005, so when I say intensive, I'm talking like Unreal Tournament 2K4 and
Half-Life 2.
Half-Life 2.
Yeah. Oh, those were the days.
Although even toward the end of my years at college, I was still able to handle things like Team Fortress 2 and Hellgate London and BioShock.
Yep.
And the Radeon HD 4850, the 4870, and 4890, those were fantastic architectures. You know, I think NVIDIA did have a slight performance lead at that point, but the thing is, those Radeon cards were cheap, they were good at gaming, and they were very efficient. Which at the time, I want to say NVIDIA's cards, even though they performed maybe better, they were huge, very inefficient, very power hungry, and expensive.
Yeah, that was getting into the GTX 200 and GTX 400 era. I remember the GTX 260. It was hot, it was loud, it played well, but it didn't hold up against the 4800 series.
Right.
I also remember the 5850.
Yeah.
The great card.
Yeah, the 5000 lineup was really solid too.
I had a 5870 and it was good.
Yeah. Then the 6000 lineup came out. It was good. 7000 series. All of those cards were very competitive and very good. And
yeah,
they traded with the 7000 series. I remember in the 5000 series, they would trade blows with NVIDIA as far as the performance crown.
Yep.
But then after that, it's just when AMD purchased them, there were all these promises, Fusion and you know, they kind of rode a lot of the design waves from ATI for a while, and they did okay. But look at them now.
I mean, GCN has been an excellent architecture for them since the 7000 series. That they've been able to iterate it as many times as they had to get it as refined as it is impressive in its own way.
Yeah.
Well, I think GCN still has some room. I mean, if you look at what a lot of people are able to do with their Radeon 7s, overclocking to around 2 to 2.1 gigahertz in a lot of cases, it's still very competitive. It's able to beat the 2080. And I have no idea what they're doing with Navi. You know, we'll have to wait and see what happens there. I would be very surprised if they have a Navi part that can beat the Radeon 7 in performance, considering they just came out with the Radeon 7. But
I mean, to be honest, I would be curious even just to see, you know, I'm running an RX 480. I would be curious even to see how Polaris would scale down to 7 nanometer. Of course, we'll never see that. But given how efficient Polaris was when it came out, admittedly 3 years ago, I'd be curious to see how much of an efficiency bump, because with my RX 480s, their stock clock, you know, is 1288.
Okay.
If I'm willing to give them a little more juice and ramp up the fans a little, I can sometimes hit 1400.
Well, that's very respectable. Because I want to say base base or static clock for 580 is around 1305, 1303. And the overclocked variants are right around 14 and a half. Yeah. I don't know what they boost at. I'm not a Polaris expert, but I know that that's a 234 millimeter squared die. And there's expectations that the Xbox-based Navi can hit right around 12.2 teraflops of performance. So I think if you do a little math, you figure Navi 7 nanometer, probably right around 230, the same GPU footprint as RX 480. You're probably around 48 compute units at 2 gigahertz, which is very possible. But then you're sitting at around, I want to say the performance level of Vega 56 maybe. Somewhere around there.
For a mid-range part would be excellent. That would put it in 1660 Ti territory.
Yeah. Well, I would assume that they'd probably have, they're leaked to have 3 parts. I think their highest performing part's probably going to be competitive with the 2070.
That wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, right around there.
Considering the Radeon 7 is supposed to compete with the 2080, having a Navi part that would compete with the 2070 makes sense.
But the only way they win back mind share, the only way they disrupt the market is if they do 2070 at $250.
Or even 300.
Yeah. That's the only way they disrupt the market, man. That's the only way. They have to come out with fast, power efficient, cheap designs.
Yep.
And that's the way they do it.
Yeah, they have to pull another terascale out of their hat.
Yeah, exactly. Those parts will be around 2 gigahertz, and I'm sure they'll be fast. I'm sure they'll be inexpensive, but they have to be ultra cheap and good build quality. Just they have to be solid. They can't come out and have broken drivers. They have to have stock at launch, and they have to be at price points that they say they're going to be at. They can't have any mistakes. It has to be a flawless launch, and it has to be a good part. So I don't know, man. I'm just really fed up.
Speaking of price points, though, the last little bit in this section I wanted to cover, this is a report based on a rumor. So again, take with sufficiently large grains of salt. This comes from the English version of the Bits and Chips forum, which is a Chinese tech forum. But they tweeted out this rumor: MSRP of RX 580 8 gig at $199 and RX 590 to $229 in next few weeks. Which, to be honest, the RX 590, they move it to $229. That indicates to me that they think the 1660 is going to perform roughly on the same level as the RX 590.
I don't know. I think it's going to perform better in a few variants. Well, I think it's going to, yeah, go ahead.
But my point is they think it's going to be that the RX 590, with its slightly better than 1060 performance, is going to be a competitor at $229 to the entry-level 1660s.
No, that's still overpriced in my opinion. It has to be at $200.
The more interesting thing is the RX 580 at $199. Considering that we often see 4 gig variants of the RX 580 at that price already, to move the 8 gig down to that price means we'll probably see sales on them even lower than we've seen before.
See, it's unfortunate. I think the RX 590 is actually an interesting part. I mean, say what you will, overclocked 580, blah, blah, blah. When you actually start digging into some forum posts and people, you know, a decently average overclock on a 590 is right around 1650 megahertz. So at that performance level, it's a pretty good part. But the problem is it's way overpriced, man. So
yeah, again, there is no bad hardware, just bad price points.
Yep.
And you know, I honestly, for a second, I was having some trouble with my Vega after one of my water leaks. It turned out all I had to do was change out some power cables. But I was starting to think about selling my Vega with the water block and getting a 590 and putting a water block on it. But thankfully my Vega's fine. So, but I don't know, man. It's just 580 is still great, but 590 at 230? Nah. Sorry. It's just nope.
Well, speaking of price, we do have a couple of hardware recommendations for this week. Some deals for you to take a look at. So let's take a look at my screen again.
What?
There's
a lot of screen sharing, Ned.
Well, this is a Seagate Barracuda 3 terabyte drive.
You're recommending a hard drive?
Well, you gotta have bulk storage.
It's large storage.
You gotta have large storage. Large storage.
And so this is a Seagate Barracuda 7200 RPM 3 terabyte drive. Again, speed-wise, it's not going to be super fast. But as bulk storage, it is an excellent drive for the price, particularly when you use that promo code EMCTVVD23. Because when you do, you save $15, which means you are getting a 3 terabyte drive for $70.
That's not bad.
Yeah.
Which is why I decided to share this.
See, I was expecting another, SSD recommendation.
Well, I did find an SSD. The problem was the sale was going to end before this show would air.
Yeah, we don't have 3 terabyte SSDs yet.
It was for a Crucial BX500 SSD, a 960 gigabyte, for $95. But
yeah, that's the new one, I think.
But the sale was going to end before this show would air, and so our lovely audience would not have been able to partake in that deal. So that's why I went with this one instead. Because this one is still active. It'll be for 3 days after the show initially airs. And you'll be able to get 3 terabytes of storage for $70. Considering that I paid $90 for 2 used 2 terabyte drives not too long ago, this is an excellent deal.
Brave man buying used hard drives. Very brave.
Well, they worked just fine for the usage I intended them for. So,
right on.
All right, and this one is a deal based on some of the things we've talked about in today's show. The reason, apparently,
is that a good deal? I don't know.
Well, this is an Alienware 25-inch gaming monitor, 1080p, but it's 240 hertz refresh rate. That was the thing that caught my eye. And it is FreeSync 2 enabled, which means since now both AMD and GeForce GPUs can utilize FreeSync, or excuse me, adaptive sync, that this would be a good investment either way at the $280 price point.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm very much a cheapskate when it comes to monitors, but
I mean, admittedly, yes, you can get certain 1080p, 144 hertz refresh monitors for about $30 to $40 less.
But it's 240 hertz.
Right. It's the high refresh you're paying for here.
Yep.
Well, it is a Dell monitor, so I mean, they do make some pretty outstanding displays.
And again,
And it's IPS.
Normally I wouldn't recommend anything Alienware because they tend to be overpriced. But in this case, at $280 for a 240 hertz monitor that'll work with basically any GPU out there, that is a pretty decent deal in my opinion.
Well,
yeah.
Well, will it work with a RX 580?
Well, it's FreeSync enabled, so yes.
It probably just won't push 240 hertz.
Oh, there's no way. There's no way a 580.
Yeah, the 580 cannot push 240 FPS,
No.
except maybe in like CS:GO.
If you're wanting to push 240 hertz, you're looking at
an RX Vega 64.
Well, it'd be a heavily modded 56, 64,
or the Radeon,
or an RTX 2070. I would guess. If you're pushing 200, if you're wanting to push 150 frames or better at 1080p, yeah, you're looking at RTX 2070 or a very heavily modded Vega. Honestly.
But the reason 240 hertz, yeah, you're going to need a high-end GPU to push that. But I figure you get a 240 hertz 1080p monitor now, and then in a year or two, you buy, a Navi part that could push that type of frame rate.
Yeah.
Or, again, since it's FreeSync enabled, you could get an NVIDIA part that could make that kind of push if you wanted to.
I guess if you're in the market for a high refresh rate, it's probably a good deal. I don't know.
That's why I decided to share it, because it's hard to find 240 hertz monitors below $300.
Yeah.
And with that, we've reached the end of our show, ladies and gentlemen.
All right.
Anyone have anything else they want to add?
Can't really think of anything.
Yeah, not at this point. Still waiting on Navi and Ryzen 3000 series.
Well, all indicators point to July, but
depends on how many times it keeps getting pushed back.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I don't have much faith in Radeon Technology Group right now.
So save your money for the possible July release date. Oh,
you know what?
As a 7.7.
I'm saving my money for my next case upgrade, actually. I don't know. For some reason, I thought, okay, 200 millimeter fan looks really cool. And then I was like, ooh, H500P mesh. I could put a dual 200 millimeter radiator behind the 200 mil. Yeah, and then I could fit the rest of my water cooling parts in there. And then I could buy a few more fittings. Yeah. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Honestly, I really like the mesh IC the way it is right now, but we'll see what happens. I don't know. When I saw that Alpha Cool block, I immediately thought of Hunter because he was talking about that small form factor build and that completely enclosed reservoir pump and CPU block. I immediately thought of you, Hunter.
That's why I was.
That would go really well with a 2600.
Yeah.
It really would. Yeah, we'll have to see if AlphaCool decides to bring that to the US market. I really hope they do.
Me too. And also the performance benchmarks and stuff, or performance numbers for it, because I'm really curious about it.
I'd be curious to see how well it does against a standard CPU block.
Yeah.
because the Alpha Cool CPU block is actually competitive with some of the best CPU blocks out there, like the EKWB
with Tex and.
I'm sure I know which YouTuber is going to put that to the test if it comes to if he can get his hands on it. Gamers Nexus, Steve will probably compare the two. He said he's not so into paying for an AI custom loop AIO though.
Yeah, we'll see though.
Yep.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to thank you for tuning in and listening to us ramble as we talk about tech. If you've enjoyed the content you've seen here, then make sure to check out the playlist of all our past TechForge episodes. Also, if you want to see more gaming content, we have some more of that here on the channel as well. In the meantime, I've been Dynamo Ned. This has been TechForge. And remember, when life has you down, Jesus loves you. And forge on.
Forge on.
Forge